The title company called on a Tuesday to say my refinance was denied. There was a $90,000 lien on my property from a personal loan my brother claimed he gave me in 2019. He had a signed promissory note with my signature. He had a witness statement from our cousin. What he didn't have was any idea that since our father's estate battle, I've recorded every single family conversation on my phone, including the one where he explained exactly how he planned to do this. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because to understand how my own brother tried to steal my house out from under me, you need to understand the Kovac family. And the Kovac family requires context. My name is Petra Kovac, and I restore historic homes for a living. Not in a cute HGTV way. In a crawl, under, a 100-year-old pier and beam, foundation, scrape lead paint in a respirator, argue with the Historic Preservation Commission about window mountain profiles kind of way. I'm a certified architectural conservator, one of about 800 in the country with an AIC credential, and I specialize in early 20th century residential structures in the Gulf Coast region. I live and work in Galveston, Texas, the island. If you've never been, imagine a place that's equal parts Victorian grandeur and hurricane scar tissue. The entire East End is a National Historic Landmark District, rows of raised painted ladies and Queen Anne's and Italianate cottages that survived the Great Storm of 1900 and have been fighting salt air and termites ever since.
My house is one of them.
A 1905 folk Victorian on Church Street, 2 stories, original longleaf pine floors, a wraparound porch with turned spindle railings that I spent 3 months hand-replicating from a single surviving original. I bought it as a wreck in 2016 for $95,000 and spent 6 years bringing it back. Every joist, every piece of beadboard, every pane of wavy antique glass, I did it myself or supervised it personally. By the time I was ready to refinance in 2023, comparable properties on Church Street were appraising between $410,000 and $480,000. My house, given the quality of the restoration, appraised at $465,000. That house wasn't just equity. It was my portfolio, my proof of concept. Every potential client who walked through the front door and ran their hand along the original cypress mantel, that was my business card. And my brother tried to take it with a forged signature and a lie. Let me tell you about Milo. Milo Kovac is 4 years older than me and has spent his entire adult life performing the role of the successful older brother while quietly drowning. He sells commercial insurance in Houston, has a nice enough office on Westheimer, drives a leased Audi Q5, wears shirts with French cuffs. He looks like a man who has it together. He does not have it together. Milo has been in debt since his early 30s. Credit cards, a home equity line he maxed out during his divorce, a boat he bought to impress a girlfriend and couldn't sell without taking a loss. He's the kind of person who finances confidence, who believes that looking successful and being successful are the same thing. And here's the part that makes it complicated, the part that keeps me from hating him cleanly. Milo wasn't always like this. When we were kids, he was the one who taught me how to use a coping saw. He was the one who drove me to my first job interview at 16. When our mother was dying of ovarian cancer in 2012, Milo was the one who sat in the hospital room every night after work while I drove in from Galveston on weekends. He carried that weight, and I think it broke something in him. Not excusing what he did, just acknowledging that people are more than their worst act, even when their worst act is really, really bad. Our father, Victor, died in 2018, and that's when the family cracked open like a dropped egg. Victor Kovac was a retired pipe fitter who'd worked at the refineries in Texas City for 31 years. He wasn't wealthy by any normal definition, but he'd been quietly socking away money in a Fidelity brokerage account since the 1980s, and he owned his house in Dickinson outright, a modest 3-bedroom ranch on a half-acre lot. When he died, his estate was worth roughly $340,000. The house, the investments, a truck, some tools. The will left everything split evenly between me and Milo. Simple, right? A clean 50-50. Should have been the easiest probate in Galveston County history. Except Milo contested it. He claimed that our father had verbally promised him the house, that I'd manipulated Dad in his final years, and that the brokerage account had originally been funded with money our mother had inherited, which, Milo argued, should have passed to him as the older child. None of this was true. None of it had any legal basis. But Milo filed a contest anyway, and for 11 months, we were locked in a probate fight that cost us both over $30,000 in legal fees and reduced the estate by a third before we even divided it. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Alma Trevino in the Galveston County Probate Court, eventually ruled exactly according to the will. 50-50. She also, in her ruling, used language that I will never forget. Asterisk, the court finds no credible evidence of undue influence and notes that the contestants' claims appear to be motivated by financial need rather than legitimate legal grievance. Asterisk. Milo was humiliated. And in the Kovac family, humiliation doesn't fade. It ferments. After the probate fight, I made a decision that my therapist had been suggesting for over a year. I started recording every family conversation, every holiday dinner, every phone call. Every time I was in a room with a Kovac, my phone was in my pocket, voice memo running. Some people will call that paranoid. Those people have never had a family member lie under oath about them. It was this habit, this quiet, consistent, unglamorous habit, that saved my house. The call from the title company came on October 17, 2023. I was underneath a house on Avenue O, literally on my back on a creeper, inspecting foundation piers when my phone rang. Galveston Title and Abstract. I'd been expecting the call. I was refinancing my Church Street house to pull out equity for a new project, a 1912 Craftsman bungalow on Winnie Street that needed a full structural rehab. Ms. Kovac, we've hit a snag with your title search, the closing agent said. Her name was Ruth Ann. She had the careful, measured voice of someone who delivers bad news for a living. There's a lien recorded against the property.
A lien?
From who? It appears to be a judgment lien. Filed in Galveston County. The lien holder is listed as Milo Kovac. I lay there on the creeper, staring up at the underside of someone else's house, and felt the ground shift beneath me in a way that had nothing to do with foundation settlement. How much? $90,000. It references a promissory note dated March 2019 for a personal loan. Ruth and I never took a loan from my brother. Not in 2019. Not ever. I understand. But the lien was filed through the county clerk's office with supporting documentation, a signed promissory note, and a witness affidavit. Whose witness?
A.
Nikola Kovac. Our cousin. Nico. Milo's drinking buddy. The guy who'd once tried to sell me a genuine Rolex out of his truck at a family reunion. I slid out from under the house, sat in the dirt, and stared at the clouds moving over Galveston Bay. My hands were shaking, not with fear, with recognition. Because I knew this was coming. Not the specifics,
but the shape of it.
The inevitability. Do you know that feeling? When someone you love finally does the terrible thing you've been bracing for. There's no surprise. Just a grim, exhausted confirmation. Like watching a crack in a wall finally give way. Here's what Milo had done, as I pieced it together over the following weeks. He'd created a promissory note, a simple one-page document stating that he'd loaned me $90,000 in March 2019 for home renovation expenses, with repayment due in 5 years at 4% interest. He'd forged my signature. Not badly, he'd clearly practiced. He'd probably used one of the many documents I'd signed during the probate process as a reference. He'd had Nico sign a witness affidavit stating that he was present when the loan was made and saw both parties sign the note. Then he'd gone to a justice of the peace, not in Galveston County, where someone might have asked questions, but in Chambers County, one county over, and obtained a default judgment. A default judgment happens when one party sues and the other party doesn't respond. Milo had apparently filed a small claims action against me in Chambers County and had the summons sent to an old address, our father's house in Dickinson, which had been sold 2 years earlier. I never received the summons. I never knew there was a case. And when I didn't show up to respond, the court entered a default judgment for $90,000 plus interest. Then Milo recorded that judgment as a lien against my property. It was, and I want to be precise about this, fraud, forgery, perjury, fraudulent service of process, and filing a false lien. Multiple felonies. This wasn't a family squabble or a misunderstanding about money. This was a calculated, multi-step scheme to steal $90,000 of equity for my home. But here's what Milo didn't know. He didn't know about the recordings. And he definitely didn't know about the one from Thanksgiving 2022. Let me set the scene. Thanksgiving 2022. Our Aunt Bozina's house in Lamarck, a small brick ranch with plastic-covered furniture and a kitchen that perpetually smelled like kapusniak and cigarette smoke. Aunt Bozina was our mother's sister, and she hosted Thanksgiving every year because she had the biggest dining table and the smallest capacity for hearing anyone else's opinions. The family was all there. Me, Milo, Nico, Aunt Bozina, her son Damien, and a handful of extended relatives who rotated in and out of the kitchen like a lazy Susan. I'd arrived late. I'd been finishing a window restoration on a job in the East End and lost track of time. By the time I walked in, Milo and Nico were already 3 beers deep and sitting on the back patio, which was enclosed with corrugated plastic panels and smelled like lighter fluid from the smoker. I walked through the kitchen to say hello, and Milo barely looked up. "There she is," he said to Nico. "Little Miss Old Houses." "Hi, Milo." "You know what I don't understand?" He gestured at me with his beer bottle. "She buys these dumps for nothing. Spends years fixing them. And now that Church Street place is worth, what, Petra? 400 grand. I don't know," I said. "I haven't had it appraised."
Right.
"Sure you haven't." He turned to Nico. "Must be nice. Some of us actually work for a living."
Nico laughed.
The performative, sycophantic laugh of a man who still owed Milo money and couldn't afford to disagree. I went inside to help Aunt Bozina with the pierogi. And my phone, as always, was in my jacket pocket. Recording. An hour later, I went back out to the patio to call everyone to dinner. They didn't hear me open the door. The corrugated plastic panels were rattling in the wind off the Gulf, and Milo and Nico were deep in conversation. What I heard made me stop in the doorway and stand very, very still. "All you'd need is the note," Nico was saying. "You write it up like a loan, backdate it, and once you've got a judgment, you file it on the property. She can't sell. She can't refi, nothing. Not until she pays you off or fights it in court." "And she'll pay," Milo said. "She won't want the court hassle. Not after last time. She'll just negotiate. Cut me a check to make it go away."
Exactly.
"And who's going to believe her over you? You've got the note. You've got a witness." "That would be you." "That would be me." Nico clinked his beer against Milo's. "What are brothers for?" "Cousins," Milo corrected. "Close enough." They both laughed. I stood in that doorway for maybe 10 seconds. 10 seconds of listening to my brother and my cousin casually plan to defraud me.
To steal from me.
To use the legal system as a weapon against me. Again, after the probate fight had already nearly broken us. I didn't confront them. I didn't slam the door or cry or scream. I turned around, went back to the kitchen, and helped Aunt Bozina drain the potatoes. And I made sure the recording saved. Now, some people would ask, why didn't you go to the police right then? Why didn't you warn him? Why didn't you do something? Because a conversation about committing fraud is not the same as committing fraud. At that point, Milo hadn't done anything illegal.
He'd talked about it.
He'd fantasized about it over cheap beer on a patio in Lamarck. If I'd confronted him, he would have denied it, laughed it off, called me paranoid. And then he would have been more careful. So I waited. The way you wait for termites to reveal themselves, not by looking at the surface, but by watching for the damage. I sat in the dirt next to my work truck for 20 minutes. A cat, one of the island's feral colonies, walked over and sat next to me like it understood the situation. A man walking his dog on the sidewalk waved. A cloud shaped like nothing in particular drifted over the Bolivar Peninsula. And I thought about the last time Milo and I had a genuinely good moment. It was 2017, maybe early 2018, before Dad died. We'd met for lunch at this little hole-in-the-wall Vietnamese place on Broadway, Pho 21, Everyone on the island knows it, and for an hour, we'd just been siblings. He told me about a client who'd insured a shrimp boat and then accidentally sunk it at the dock. I told him about finding a perfectly preserved stained glass transom window behind drywall in a house on Ball Street. We laughed. We split a Vietnamese iced coffee, and he picked up the check without making it weird. That was the brother I remembered. The one who existed before the debt, and the divorce, and the slow, corrosive realization that his little sisters, playing in the mud, had somehow built more real wealth than his corner office. Because that's what this was really about, underneath all the legal language and the forged signatures. Jealousy. Not the sharp, clean kind, the rotting kind. The kind that grows in the dark when a person watches someone else build something real, while their own life runs on fumes and appearances. Milo looked at my house and saw $465,000 he didn't have. He looked at my career and saw someone who'd found a way to turn passion into property while he sold policies to people who resented paying for them. And instead of asking himself how he'd gotten so lost, he decided that taking from me was easier than finding himself. That brother was gone now, or buried so deep under the performance that he couldn't find his way out. After Ruthan's call, I did 3 things in rapid succession. First, I called my attorney, not the probate lawyer. I was done with probate lawyers. I called a litigation attorney named Ines Garza, who worked out of a small firm on the Strand in Galveston and had a reputation for being relentlessly precise. I'd met her at a Historic Preservation Commission meeting where she'd represented a client fighting a demolition permit, and she'd cross-examined the developer's expert witness so thoroughly that the man had asked for a glass of water twice in 20 minutes. "This is forgery and fraud," Ines said, after I'd explained everything. "Multiple felonies. But I want to do this right. Can you prove you never received the summons?" The address on the service is my father's old house in Dickinson. It was sold in 2021. I've lived on Church Street since 2016. Good. And the promissory note. Have you seen it? Not yet. We'll subpoena it. Now, you mentioned recordings? I have a recording of my brother and my cousin discussing this exact scheme. Thanksgiving 2022. 10 months before the lien was filed. The silence on Ines's end lasted long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "Petra," she said, "is Texas a one-party consent state?"
Yes.
"I've checked." "You've had this recording for a year?" "I have recordings of every family interaction since 2019. After the probate case, I started." "I don't need the explanation. I need the files. All of them. Can you bring them to my office tomorrow?" "I'll be there at 9. The second thing I did was request a certified copy of the filed lien and the default judgment from the county clerk's offices. When I saw the promissory note, I almost laughed. Milo had typed it up in what looked like a Word template downloaded from the internet. My signature was close. He'd clearly studied my handwriting, but he'd made the P in Petra with a curved tail. I've never curved my P. Not once in my life. It's a sharp downstroke, no flourish. A handwriting examiner would catch it in 5 minutes. The third thing I did was call Milo. Not to confront him. To give him a chance. This is the part that surprises people. After everything, after the probate fight, after the forgery, after hearing him plot to defraud me on a patio that smelled like lighter fluid and betrayal, I called my brother and gave him an opportunity to undo it. "Hey," I said. "How's it going?"
Good. Busy.
"What's up?" "I'm refinancing the house and the title company found a lien. From you." Silence. For seconds.
Oh, yeah.
That. His voice shifted, not panicked but calibrated. "Careful. I mean, you know that's from the loan, right? The money I lent you in 2019.
Milo.
You never lent me money." "Petra, come on. I know it was a while ago, but you never lent me $90,000. You've never had $90,000 to lend. And we both know that." More silence. "Look," he said, "I don't want to make this a whole thing. We can work something out. Maybe you pay me back half, and I'll release the lien." There it was, the negotiation. The pressure. Exactly what he'd told Nico on the patio. Asterisk, she'll just negotiate. Cut me a check to make it go away. Asterisk. Milo, I'm going to ask you in time. Remove the lien voluntarily. I'm not removing it. That's my money. It's not your money. It's a forged document and a fraudulent judgment. And I have proof. You have nothing. His voice hardened. It's your word against mine and Nico's. And I've got the signed note. Okay, I said. I gave you the chance. Chance for what? I hung up. What happened next unfolded over about 3 months, and I'll compress it because the legal system is many things, but fast isn't one of them. Ines Garza filed a motion to vacate the default judgment in Chambers County, arguing fraudulent service of process. She simultaneously filed a lien contest action in Galveston County. And this was the part that made my stomach drop. She referred the case to the Galveston County District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. You're pressing charges against your own brother? My Aunt Bozina said when she found out. She called me on a Sunday morning, her voice tight with the kind of disapproval that Polish Catholic aunts have perfected over centuries. Your mother would be ashamed. My mother would be ashamed that her son forged my name on a legal document and tried to steal my house. Families handle things privately, Petra. He filed a lien in a public court, Aunt Bozina. He made it public. She hung up on me. It was the 3rd time a family member had hung up on me in a month. I was developing a tolerance. Here's the thing about fighting fraud within a family. The fraud itself isn't the hardest part. The hardest part is everyone else. The aunts and uncles and cousins who'd rather you quietly absorb the loss than cause a scene. The relatives who treat the victim's refusal to be victimized as a greater sin than the crime itself. The gravitational pull of keeping the peace, as if peace that requires you to accept being robbed is peace at all. But I had Ines. And I had the recordings. And I had a very specific, meticulous anger that wasn't going anywhere. The hearing to vacate the default judgment was held on a Wednesday morning in February 2024 in a small courtroom in Chambers County that smelled like old carpet and industrial cleaner. Milo was there with his own attorney, a guy from one of those strip mall law offices off I-45 who looked like he'd been briefed on the case about 20 minutes before the hearing. Nico was there too, sitting in the gallery with his arms crossed and his jaw set in what he probably thought was a tough expression but which mostly made him look constipated. Milo wouldn't look at me. He sat at the respondent's table and stared at a spot on the wall about 6 inches above the judge's head. The judge, a tired-looking man named Judge Harwell, reviewed the motion. The arguments were straightforward at first. Ines demonstrated that the summons had been sent to a property I hadn't occupied since visiting my father before his death, that the property had been sold in 2021, and that my current address was a matter of public record that could have been verified with a 5-minute search. Milo's attorney argued that an honest mistake was made regarding the address. Ines let that hang in the air for a moment. Then she said, "Your Honor, we'd like to introduce evidence regarding the underlying promissory note." She submitted the note itself, along with a report from a certified forensic document examiner, Dr. Lien Ostrowski from the University of Houston, who had analyzed my known signature samples against the one on the note. Dr. Ostrowski's report concludes, with a high degree of professional certainty, that the signature on the promissory note is not consistent with Ms. Kovac's authentic handwriting, Ines said. Specific deviations include the curvature of the uppercase P, the spacing between the first and last name, and the pen pressure patterns, which suggest the writer was copying rather than signing naturally. Milo's attorney leaned over and whispered something to Milo. Milo's face was the color of wet cement. Additionally, Your Honor, Ines continued, we'd like to introduce an audio recording. The courtroom got very quiet. This recording was made on November 24, 2022, Thanksgiving Day, at a family gathering in La Marque, Texas. Texas is a one-party consent state, and my client was present during the recorded conversation. The recording captures the respondent, Milo Kovac, and the affianced witness, Nikola Kovac, discussing the specific plan to create a fraudulent promissory note, obtain a default judgment through improper service, and file a lien against my client's property. Ines pressed play. The audio quality wasn't perfect. There was wind noise, the rattle of those corrugated plastic panels, the distant sound of Aunt Bozina yelling at someone about the turkey. But the voices were clear. And the words were unmistakable. Asterisk. All you'd need is the note. You write it up like a loan, backdate it, and once you've got a judgment, you file it on the property. Asterisk. Asterisk. She'll just negotiate. Cut me a check to make it go away. Asterisk. Asterisk. Who's going to believe her over you? You've got the note. You've got a witness. Asterisk. Asterisk. That would be you. Asterisk. Asterisk. That would be me. Asterisk. The recording played for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. In a courtroom, for minutes is a geological age. I watched Milo as he listened to his own voice, his Thanksgiving voice, loose with fear and certainty and the casual cruelty of a man who believed his sister would always be easier to steal from than to respect. His attorney put his hand on Milo's arm. Milo didn't move. Nico, in the gallery, stood up and walked out of the courtroom. Nobody stopped him. Judge Harwell paused the proceedings for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably 90 seconds. He removed his glasses, rubbed his eyes, and looked at Milo's attorney. "Counselor," he said, "does your client wish to respond to this evidence?" Milo's attorney asked for a recess. The judge gave him 15 minutes. When they came back, the attorney said that Milo would not contest the motion to vacate. The default judgment was vacated. The lien was ordered removed. And Judge Harwell, in a tone that reminded me of Judge Trevino from the probate case, that same weary, precise disappointment, said this: "Mr. Kovac, the court is referring this matter to the Galveston County District Attorney for further investigation. I want to be clear. What has been presented today goes well beyond a civil dispute. If even half of what's been demonstrated here holds up under criminal scrutiny, you are facing serious consequences. I'd strongly advise you to retain appropriate counsel." Milo stood up. He looked at me for the first time that day. And what I saw in his face wasn't anger. It wasn't defiance. It was the look of a man who had finally run out of room. He walked out without a word. I stayed in the courtroom for a few minutes after everyone left. Ines was packing her briefcase, and she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You all right?" she asked. "I don't know." "That's a fair answer." She snapped the briefcase closed. "For what it's worth, I've been doing this for 12 years, and I've never had a case this clean. Most fraud cases are circumstantial. Arguments about intent, ambiguity about what was meant. You had the man planning the crime in his own words 10 months before he committed it. That recording wasn't just evidence. It was a confession before the fact. He's still my brother." Ines nodded. "I know, and that's why this is hard. If he were a stranger, you'd feel righteous. But he's not a stranger. He's the kid who taught you how to use a saw." I looked at her, surprised. I'd mentioned that detail once, in passing, during our first meeting. "I listen," Ines said. "It's kind of the whole job." The weeks after the hearing were strange. The legal machinery ground forward, but the family machinery, that intricate, unwritten system of loyalties and silences that holds a family together like old mortar, was falling apart. Damien, Aunt Bozina's son, called me to say he was staying out of it, which is what people say when they've already decided whose side they're on. 2 of my mother's friends from the old parish, women I'd known since childhood, stopped returning my calls. And a distant cousin I barely knew sent me a Facebook message that said, simply, "Snitches don't do well in this family." I deleted the message and went back to stripping paint off a baseboard. Here's something nobody tells you about standing up for yourself within a family. The cost isn't the legal fees or the court dates or even the broken relationships. The cost is learning, with painful clarity, how many people in your life valued the peace more than they valued you. How many relatives would have preferred that I quietly wrote Milo a check, swallowed the injustice, and kept smiling at holiday dinners. How many people saw my refusal to be robbed as a greater disruption than the robbery itself? It's a specific kind of loneliness. The loneliness of being right in a room full of people who wish you'd been wrong. The criminal case is still pending as of when I'm telling you this. The DA's office has filed charges: forgery of a financial instrument, which is a third-degree felony in Texas, and fraudulent filing of a lien, which carries its own penalties. Nico is charged with aggravated perjury for the false witness affidavit. Milo's attorney is negotiating. I expect a plea deal. I don't expect prison time. First offense, nonviolent. The system has bigger fish. But the felony conviction, if it comes, will cost him his insurance license. And for Milo, who built his entire identity around being the successful brother in the nice office with the French cuff shirts, losing that license will be its own kind of reckoning. I don't feel good about any of it.
I want to be honest about that.
Because the stories you see online, the revenge stories, the karma stories, the she thought she could mess with me stories, they always end with triumph. The protagonist walking away in slow motion, vindicated, glowing, free. Real life doesn't feel like that. Real life feels like sitting in your truck in a courthouse parking lot, staring at the steering wheel, and realizing that you just played a recording of your brother's voice in open court. That you heard his voice planning to hurt you, and then you used that voice to hurt him back. That you were right, and that being right cost you something you can't name. I drove back to Galveston across the causeway, and the bay was gray and flat, and the sky looked like tin. I parked on Church Street and sat on my porch, the porch with the hand-turned spindles, the porch I built, and I cried. Not because I lost. Because I won, and winning against your own family isn't winning. It's surviving. 3 weeks after the hearing, I got a letter. Not from a lawyer. From Aunt Bozina. It was handwritten, in her cramped, old-world script, on stationery that smelled faintly of the lavender sachets she kept in every drawer. Petra. Asterisk, I was wrong to say your mother would be ashamed. Your mother would have been furious at Milo. I was angry because you made me see something I didn't want to see. That's not your fault. Asterisk. Bozina. Asterisk P.S. The pierogi recipe is in the blue notebook in the kitchen cabinet. Your mother's. I've been meaning to give it to you. Asterisk. I read that letter 4 times. Then I put it in the drawer of my desk, the desk I'd restored from a 1920s Oak Partners desk I found in a warehouse off Harborside Drive, and I went back to work. The refinance closed in April. Clean title. The lien was gone like it had never existed, except, of course, it had existed, and the scar it left on my credit report took another 2 months to fully clear. I used the equity to buy the Winnie Street Craftsman. It's a disaster. Foundation cracked in 3 places, the gallery roof sagging like a tired mouth, original siding so salt-eaten it crumbles when you press it. It's exactly the kind of house that most people would demolish and replace with a raised concrete box. I'm going to save it. The way I save all of them. Board by board, nail by nail, with the patience of someone who understands that the things worth keeping are never the things that are easy. Emmett, a structural engineer I've been working with on the project, asked me the other day why I bother. Why I pour money and years into houses that would be cheaper to tear down and start fresh. Because someone built this. I told him. 100 years ago, someone cut this wood and drove these nails and hung this door, and they thought it would last.
And it did last.
It just needs someone to care about it again. He looked at me like he wanted to say something about more than houses.
He didn't.
But I saw it.
Some things take time.
Galveston teaches you that if you let it. This island has been flattened by hurricanes, flooded by storm surges, and written off by people who don't understand why anyone would rebuild in a place that the Gulf of Mexico keeps trying to reclaim. But people keep rebuilding. Not because they're naive. Because they understand something that comfortable people in safe places never learn, that the act of rebuilding is the meaning. That choosing to stay and repair what's broken, even knowing it might break again, is the most human thing there is. I think about that a lot when I'm under a house, staring up at joists that were cut by hand a century ago, held together by square-head nails and the stubborn faith that craft matters. Milo hasn't called. Our cousin Nico apparently left the state. Rumor is he's in Oklahoma, working at an auto auction. Aunt Bozina invited me to Easter. I went.
We didn't talk about it.
She served kapusniak and pierogi, and we watched a Spurs game, and she told me a story about my mother sneaking out of their apartment in Gdansk when she was 16 to meet a boy who played the accordion. She was fearless, Bozina said. Like you. I don't feel fearless. I feel tired and cautious and permanently braced for the next crack in the foundation. But maybe that's what fearlessness actually looks like, not the absence of fear but the decision to keep building anyway. Last week, I was under the Winnie Street house, mapping the foundation damage, and I found something scratched into one of the original cedar piers. Initials and a date. J.R.M. 1912. Someone's mark. A builder who was there at the beginning, who wanted the world to know he existed, who carved his name into the part of the house that no one would ever see. I ran my thumb over the letters. They were rough and shallow, cut with a pocket knife probably, over 100 years ago. And I thought about evidence, about the things we leave behind, the signatures, the recordings, the marks, not because we want to be remembered, but because we want the truth to survive us. Milo tried to put his name on something that wasn't his. He forged a signature, fabricated a debt, and filed it in a courthouse, as if repetition could make a lie true. But I had the real record. The one that's harder to forge. The one that plays back in your own voice, in your own words, on a Thanksgiving patio while the wind rattled the plastic walls and the turkey cooled on the counter. Some people think the truth is fragile, that it can be overwritten by a louder story or a bolder lie. But the truth is more like a foundation pier. It's underground, it's invisible, and it holds up everything above it. You just have to know where to look. Asterisk, there's a saying in historic preservation. The building will tell you what it needs. You just have to listen. Asterisk. Asterisk, I think the same is true of people. My brother told me who he was on that patio. He told me in plain language, with a beer in his hand, exactly what he planned to do. And I listened, not because I wanted to catch him, because I'd learned the hard way that love and trust are not the same thing. Asterisk. You can love someone and still change the locks. You can grieve a relationship and still press play. You can save a house and lose a brother, and sit on your porch at dusk, watching the light come off the gulf, and know, with the quiet certainty of someone who has checked and rechecked the foundation, that you are standing on solid ground.